Mark sat at the far end of the dimly lit bar, nursing a whiskey he couldn't afford and pretending not to notice the judgmental glances from the bartender. The Rookery wasn't the kind of place he usually visited, but then again, nothing about his life had felt normal since the divorce. The walls were dark wood, the air thick with the smell of spilled beer and old cigarettes. Most patrons came in pairs or groups, laughter punctuating the low murmur of conversations. Mark, on the other hand, clung to his drink like a lifeline, trying to drown out the ache of another wasted evening. He noticed her before she noticed him, or so he thought. She stood near the jukebox, her silhouette illuminated by the neon glow of a Miller Lite sign. Celeste. She looked effortlessly magnetic, her long auburn hair framing a sharp but delicate face. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on Mark just long enough to make him feel both seen and unsettled. When she walked over and slid onto the stool beside him, Mark's pulse quickened. "You look like you could use some company," she said. Mark chuckled nervously. "Is it that obvious?" They talked for hours. Celeste was easy to talk to, too easy. She laughed at his jokes, even the self-deprecating ones, and seemed genuinely interested in his ramblings about his dead-end sales job and the wreckage of his marriage. "You're better off without her," Celeste said. "Some people, they just take and take until there's nothing left of you." Mark nodded, swallowing hard. It felt like she knew him in a way no one else did. When she invited him back to her flat for a drink, it didn't feel like a line. It felt like salvation. The cab ride was quiet. Celeste stared out the window, her expression unreadable. Mark fidgeted with his phone, typing and deleting a text to his best friend Tom. What would he even say? "Met someone amazing? She's different?" Tom would laugh and tell him to be careful. Celeste's flat was on the top floor of an old building, the kind of place that looked elegant but carried an undercurrent of decay. Cracked paint on the walls, faint water stains on the ceiling. She unlocked the door and gestured for him to enter. The flat was eerily immaculate, black and white furniture, no personal touches, no photos, no clutter. It looked like a showpiece, not a home. Mark's unease prickled, but he brushed it aside. She poured them both a drink, a deep amber liquid that smelled faintly of honey and smoke. "Welcome to my sanctuary," she said. He joined her, trying to shake off the growing tension. They talked more, but the conversation took a darker turn. "Do you think people ever really change?" Celeste asked. Mark replied, "I don't know. I'd like to think so, but maybe not." She leaned in closer. "And you, Mark? Do you want to change? Or are you just running?" The question hit him like a punch. He stammered, searching for a reply, but before he could answer, a faint sound interrupted them. "What was that?" Mark asked. Celeste smiled, her expression calm, probably just the wind. The sound came again, louder this time, accompanied by a faint vibration in the walls. Mark stood, his heart pounding. "Are you sure?" Before she could respond, the lights flickered. The air grew heavier, charged with something Mark couldn't name. He turned to Celeste, expecting alarm, but she remained seated, her eyes fixed on him. "You wanted this," she said. Mark's voice trembled. "What are you talking about?" She stood, her movements slow and deliberate. "You came here because you were searching for something. You told yourself it was connection, comfort, maybe love. But that's not the truth, is it?" The room seemed to shift around them. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching across the floor like living things. Mark stumbled toward the door, his breath coming in shallow gasps. I need to go," he said. "You can't leave," Celeste replied. The shadows surged, wrapping around the door like vines. Mark pounded on it, but it wouldn't budge. He turned back to Celeste, his fear boiling over into anger. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. She tilted her head, her expression almost pitying. "This is what happens when you let the darkness in, Mark. You opened the door, and now it's here." Mark's screams echoed in the confined space, but there was no answer. The shadows crept closer, their cold tendrils brushing against his skin. Celeste watched, her gaze distant. "Do you want to know the truth, Mark? About why your life fell apart? About why you're here?" she asked. He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I don't care. I just want to leave." Her laughter was low and bitter, Of course you don't. The truth is ugly and you've spent your whole life running from it. The room dissolved, replaced by a swirling void. Mark found himself standing in scenes from his past. His ex-wife sobbing as he berated her for something trivial. His best friend walking away after another broken promise. His boss shaking his head in disappointment. You told yourself it wasn't your fault, but deep down you knew, Celeste's voice echoed. Mark fell to his knees, clutching his head. Stop it! Please, just stop! The shadows closed in, wrapping around him like a cocoon. Celeste knelt beside him, her face inches from his. It's too late for redemption, Mark, but don't worry. You won't be alone for long, she said, her lips curling into a smile as the shadows consumed him. The next night, Celeste sat at the same bar, a faint smile playing on her lips. A new man approached, his eyes weary, his tie loosened. Mind if I sit here? He asked. She gestured to the empty stool. Be my guest. Mark's screams echoed in the void, unheard and unending.